Hello again, everyone. It is your favorite history tutor, Miss Dodge. Today, these notes are going to cover the other two of our Mesoamerican civilizations. Our last set of notes that you should have watched before this one introduced us into European exploration and one of our three Mesoamerican civilizations, the Aztecs. Today we're going to cover the last two, and then we have one more set of notes where we unfortunately bring about the end of these civilizations. So today we're going to talk about the Mayans and the Inca people. These are some of my favorite notes. I said that last time too. I absolutely love learning about and teaching Mesoamerican civilizations, and hopefully you do too. So let's dive right into the Mayans. The Mayan people lived nearby to the Aztecs. They were located on a peninsula of southern Mexico called the Yucatan Peninsula. It's part of Mexico today. I believe it is also a part of Guatemala and some other countries as well. So the Yucatan Peninsula is home to the Mayan civilization. They basically lived in the rainforest. Where they lived on the Yucatan Peninsula was very much so tropical climate. Very dense jungle, lots of rain. Remember, the Aztecs were not getting a lot of rain. The Mayans definitely didn't have that problem. They did have a problem, though, with having open land on which to farm. They had plenty of rain to water the crops, but most of the land of the Yucatan Peninsula was thick, dense jungle, lots of trees and, vines and just crazy rainforest. The Mayans actually would use something called slash and burn. They would literally chop at the rainforest and sometimes even set it on fire to kind of clear large spaces in which they would be able to farm. Definitely the opposite of the Aztecs' problem. The capital city of the Mayans is called Chichen Itza. There's supposed to be accents on this, but I couldn't figure out how to type them on my computer because I don't even know. But so there are supposed to be accents, I'm sorry, but it is pronounced Chichen Itza. That's their capital city. And the Mayans actually weren't really considered an empire. They were kind of a group of city-states, so smaller cities and the surrounding area kind of each working together to form the Mayan civilization. Each city-state was ruled by a king. We should be having flashbacks now that I'm saying city-states. What should we be thinking of? We should be thinking of Greece. Greece was the most recent civilization that we learned about that utilized city-states. And the Mayans used them as well. And like I said, each was ruled by a king. So they still had monarchy, but in the form of city-states. The Mayans basically lived off farming and trading with other civilizations. We see very complex trade networks. A lot of people seem to think, oh, those Native Americans, oh, they're so dumb. They just, petered around in the forest and did nothing. And that's actually not true. We have very, very, very complex trade networks, evidence of these networks as well, that there were highways. Obviously, they didn't have cars, so it's mostly walking or on the back of an animal, an oxen or a horse or something. Actually, not a horse because they didn't have those till the Spanish brought them. But seriously planned and well-traveled paths that connect native civilizations all the way up in northern North America, what today would be like Seattle, Oregon and Washington State, and then all the way down through the middle part of North America, what today is our Midwest, our kind of Great Plains area, through Mexico, through Central America, and all the way down to the Incans in South America. So just crazy, crazy trade networks. And this was something that the Mayans, made work for their civilization. They're also very famous for their Mayan calendar. They created a calendar that was used for thousands of years. And so basically they would just do like chunks at a time, like 2,000 years at a time, which is crazy. They were very accurate calendars as well. And they actually had a couple different calendars. which is more than we really need to get into. But they had calendars for like farming, and then they had like religious ceremony calendars. They had a couple of different calendars. But this kind of became a little kerfuffle, a little bit of a hullabaloo, because the Mayan calendar ended on December 22nd, 2012. By the way, this is what the calendar looks like. It's circular. It has kind of like interlooping circles that kind of move and all kinds of stuff. It's really cool. Anyway, and the Mayan calendar just ended, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, like the Mayans probably had some sort of premonition, some sort of like dream that everybody was going to die. That's why the calendar ends. And everybody thought the world was going to end, but then we didn't die. So, the Mayans just probably were just like, they didn't think they were going to be around that long, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, if you remember back that far, 8 years ago, everybody was all in a panic about it. While it is not important that you remember everybody was in a panic, it is important that you remember that the Mayans are very famous for their calendar. Even before everyone thought the world was going to end, the calendar was something that was very unique and very special about the Mayans. Having a complex and accurate timekeeping system that relates correctly to the movement of the moon, movement of the sun, movement of the stars, that requires advanced scientific and astronomical knowledge. And so for them to have such a complex calendar really shows just how, complex their civilization was, which is something that's really, really special about them. The Mayans had a similar religion to the Aztecs. They're both polytheistic, and they both build large pyramids. They both perform human sacrifice. The Aztecs did so much more than the Mayans did, but there were still human sacrifices in the Mayan civilization. And like I said, they built those same kind of temples, same style of temples, those kind of step pyramids that we saw in our Aztec notes. Now here's something that's really interesting about the Mayans. Because the Mayan civilization was built in the rainforest, many of their buildings are probably right now undiscovered. Okay, when the Spanish spoiler alert, when the Spanish conquered the Mayans, they don't preserve all of the Mayan artifacts. They don't really care. And so we have probably many Mayan temples and even possibly whole cities that were just kind of abandoned. And because of the location in this intense jungle rainforest, they just kind of got overgrown again. And it's very possible that we just don't know that they're there, right? You can see here, some of these are a little bit more obvious, right? If we do a flyover in a helicopter or a plane, you can definitely see that this is something that is not natural. This is very clearly made by a human, right? And same thing here. You can see these stone pyramids kind of popping out of the jungle here. But this is an example of something that's not so obvious. Because if we were to fly over the jungle, we would simply just see trees, right? We'd have to really get down there and do kind of what we call topographical mapping. That means we measure, where the hills are, where the little, ditches and dips and mountains and ravines and blah, 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 and really do that. But because it's such a dense jungle, it's very difficult to wade through that and wade through it safely, because not only is it a jungle of plants, it's a jungle of animals as well. And there are, jaguars probably, and snakes and spiders and all kinds of, things that could kill you in there. And so it's very tough work for us. And it's very likely, 20 years from now, when I'm teaching y'all's kids and stuff, that I am going to teach them more about the Mayans than I'm teaching you right now. If we uncover more of this information about the Mayans and more cities and more writings, it's very likely that I'll have more to teach them, which is something that's really cool to think about. Maybe it's just me because I'm a huge history geek, but that's exciting to me. Okay, the Mayans, speaking of Mayan writing, the Mayan writing was pictographic. It looks kind of like hieroglyphics, but a little different. Here are some examples of Mayan writing. It's very square, something that's similar kind of to the Chinese writing that we looked at, right? So each kind of symbol is in a square, right? We see this? Here they are kind of smushed together. But it is pictographic like Egyptian hieroglyphics. You can see images of things in them. This is some sort of frog face. I'm not seeing, this is a side of somebody's face. This is his mouth and his nose. It's probably his ear hole. This looks like the head of a snake. Okay, and so it's pictures of things combined with other little curlicue images and stuff. This to me looks either like a person, like with a closed eye, or possibly like a ram, some sort of sheep thing. Anyway, and so they do have a pictographic language, and they use it primarily for tracking trade and tracking farming. Oh, I traded this to so-and-so for this many dollars, blah, blah, blah. And it's all over their pyramid temples as well, which is how we have these kind of pieces of writing, which is really quite cool. And like I said, if we find more of this hidden in the jungle, we could uncover more about the Mayan civilization. Okay, the Incas. The Incas are the farthest away. They settle in the Andes Mountains, which is on the west coast of South America. It's a lot of Chile today, but also parts of Peru as well. And they live high up in the mountains, which makes it kind of difficult for them to farm. And when I mean like in the mountains, like I don't mean like we're in the mountains here. I mean like way up in the mountains, like on the tops of mountains. And I'll show you how they did that in a minute. But the reason that it's difficult for them to farm that high is because the higher you go into the atmosphere, the farther away you get from what we call sea level, the less oxygen there is in the air, right? It may not feel that way, but the higher, when you climb a really tall mountain, you're moving farther away from Earth and you're getting closer basically to outer space. Now you can't climb a mountain in the outer space, but still, there's less oxygen in the air, in the atmosphere, the higher up you go. If you've ever visited a place that's high in the mountains, like the Rocky Mountains, or even the Andes Mountains, some of you may have been visiting South America as well, way up in the Andes Mountains, if you kind of feel a little lightheaded, right? That's because there's not as much oxygen in the air as you're used to breathing down here. That's true for plants as well. Just like there's less oxygen, plants need carbon dioxide, there's less carbon dioxide up there, which makes it a little bit difficult for plants to grow. Additionally, it's a freaking mountain. And if you try and plant crops on the side of a mountain, you're going to go tumbling down the mountain because there's not a flat space. So they create something called terrace farming. A terrace is basically a flat outcropping. Houses can have terraces, usually on the second floor. It's like a very, very small porch. When we're talking about terrace farming, we're basically talking about cutting steps into the mountain to create flat spaces for crops to grow. I'll show you what I mean by that. This is what a terrace farming looks like, okay? So you can see we've got a mountain here, but instead of having the slope all the way down, we've cut it into a series of steps. They're like giant stairs, okay? We can see some terraces are larger than others. It's all going to depend on how sloped the mountain is, right? If it's a really thin slope, it's not that steep, we can have a larger terrace because we're not worried about tumbling off the mountain. If it's a very steep slope, see it gets steeper up here, we have to have smaller terraces in order to create that flat point, okay? There's usually some sort of stairway up the middle. Here's the one for this one, right? And so it's hard to see because this is, obviously zoomed out a lot. But this would be the stairway that the farmer would climb. And then if you needed to, get to plants on a certain terrace, you would just walk down the terrace and then walk back to the stairs to walk up and down. Because sometimes they were quite large terraces, as we can see up here. This is a person, okay? And while they look like nice steps that you can just step on down, This terrace is almost twice as tall as these people, right? So it's not always stair steps that we can just climb up and down willy-nilly. You can see right behind him, though, it's kind of hard to see, this is the stairway, right? So those are the human-sized stairs to go up and down these terrace farms, right? And when I say they are in the mountains, like, I'm not joking, like, these are the clouds, okay? Look how high they are in this mountain farming. The Incas were not fooling around. They were up there. All right, that's terrace farming. Now, they can only grow like certain types of crops because of their high altitude. Now, be careful here. I'm gonna, hint, I'm gonna ask you what altitude means on your study guide. Do not just write, they were very high up. That's what high altitude means. To be in a high altitude means you're very high up. The word altitude itself, though, does not mean very high up. Altitude is the measurement of how far away you are from sea level. Sea as in the ocean, right? If I were to go and stand at the beach, right, in the water, my altitude would be 0 because I'm at sea level, okay? If I were to climb up a rocky mountain in Colorado, my altitude would probably be somewhere around 12,000 to 15,000 feet, okay? Altitude is how far away you are from sea level, okay? Up and down, not east or west, okay? I may be 400 miles away from Virginia Beach, but 400 miles isn't my altitude. If I were 400 miles in the atmosphere, I would be like in outer space, floating around outside, waving down to y'all. Okay. Winchester altitude would be, I think we're somewhere around 1,000. I think it's meters. I think they measure it in meters. Sometimes feet. We don't really use meters here too much. But it's not your height. It's how far away you are from the ocean level, right? So a lot of places on the coast, very low altitude. When you climb a mountain, you have very high altitude because you're really far away from the ocean, okay? Little iffy there. Please make sure you comment if you have a question about that. Okay, the Inca capital, we had a little debate over this. The Inca capital was technically a city called Cuzco. Your standards don't care about Cuzco, though, for some reason. They want you to know Machu Picchu. And granted, Machu Picchu is super cool, so we'll talk about it. You can still visit it today. It is in Peru. So if you ever make it down to Peru, make sure you stop by Machu Picchu. And you can tell them everything that you learned from me about Machu Picchu. And they're going to be so impressed. We're going to look at Machu Picchu in a minute. It is fascinating. Very, very cool. The Incas were ruled by an emperor, right? So our Mayans had kings. Emperors are the leaders of Incan cities. But their religion was polytheistic too. So that's something that they share among the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Inca. The Incas were very famous for their sun gods. That was their kind of main god. Okay, I kind of spoiled it. But this is Machu Picchu. How cool is this? This is so cool. So this is an Incan city. It was abandoned when the Spanish arrived. And they just kind of forgot about it until it was rediscovered in like the 1910s or something. If I remember correctly, it was like 1919 or something like that. Anyway, absolutely fascinating. Literally, look at this, on top of a mountain. Absolutely nuts. We believe that Machu Picchu was probably some sort of royal kind of vacation home. It is the size of a town, but a very small town. Very likely homes and a small marketplace for all the people who were traveling with the Incan emperor. But probably not on its own an independent city. Probably just, like I said, like a vacation home for the emperor and his family whenever he just, had to get away. But it's absolutely beautiful. We have beautiful terraces. We have beautiful Incan buildings that are, I can't even believe they're intact. This thing is like 1,000 years old. It's absolutely nuts. We have examples of Incan terrace farming, right? And then you can kind of see it here. This is the stairway to get in. All right, you can see more examples of terrace farming on the side here. You can visit Machu Picchu. Like I said, this picture is taken from like the lookout platform. So you kind of stand on a mountaintop nearby and take pictures down. I always thought you couldn't go in it, but I see some people, so maybe you can. I've never been. It is definitely on my bucket list. Definitely something I want to do in my lifetime, but I have not yet. So I don't know if you can go in there or not. If anyone goes, let me know. But absolutely fascinating, fascinating city. Something else that's fascinating about the Incas is they had no written language. Absolutely nuts. They have a huge empire spanning all up and down the Andes Mountains, all up and down the west coast of South America. And they don't write anything down. I can't even imagine. Pretend you're taking my class, and we're not taking SOLs anymore, but pretend you had to take the SOL, and you sat there through my class this whole semester, and you couldn't write anything down. You had to remember it all off of just memory. You had no notes to look back on. That's nuts. That's absolutely nuts to run a entire empire with nothing written down. It's absolutely fascinating. But they did have two specific things that helped keep communication strong, even though they weren't writing anything down. The first is excellent roads. We've seen that before with the Persians and the Romans. Roads are really important to keeping an empire together. If you want to control an empire and keep control of an empire, you've got to be able to move information quickly. And the Incans did that. Their road networks were fantastic. They had people whose whole job was to just run back and forth between two cities on these road networks and pass information back and forth. I could never. I hate running. Second of all, they use something called quipus. Okay? That's what I'm saying, quipus. Sometimes you might want to say quipus. I won't fight you for it, okay? And this was kind of like a memory tool to help runners remember what they were supposed to tell the other city when they were running back and forth. Because sometimes when they're running, they just like forget what's going on, I guess. Okay, what are quipus? Quipus are basically colored pieces of string with knots in them. The color of the string helped you remember what the event was. How many babies were born, how many people passed away, how many bushels of corn they grew, etc. How much money in taxes they paid. The specific thing that needed to be counting was the color. The knots told you how many of that thing happened. It's not as straightforward as that. There was some kind of probably multiplication, division, etc. involved, but we don't really need to dive too deep in that. However many knots there were, or this kind of math thing involved, meant how many of that thing happened. So if there are 6 knots on the black string, it meant 6 people had died since the last quipu. It's kind of like the newspaper a little bit, except with no words, only strings, right? You have the birth section, you have the obituary section, which is where they talk about all the people who have passed away, talk about their family and everything. You have, news stories about crops and stock market and all this kind of stuff. And it's basically, the Quipu is basically very similar to that, except, like I said, it doesn't have any words. It's simply a memory tool to remind the runner what to tell everybody about so they don't forget anything. All right, this is what oh, see, I missed it there. I almost said quipus. All right, this is what the quipus look like. And like I said, you can see some of the knots are like multiple knots, right? We have a feeling that that means something different. But you can see different groupings, different colors, different size of knots, etc. And then these were how they communicated, which just totally blows my mind that they just ran this entire empire, never wrote anything down. They just used these colored necklaces. Absolutely crazy. Hopefully you're finding it as interesting as I do. And that is it for these notes, friends. Make sure you complete the exit ticket for these notes as well. Goodbye.